Every year, for as long as most Russians alive today can remember, the last Sunday of July has looked the same. Warships anchored in formation on the water, sailors standing at attention on open decks, the president reviewing the fleet from a small boat moving slowly along the Neva River in St. Petersburg. This year, according to reporting from Business Insider and the Maritime Executive, that fleet simply did not show up. Russia's Navy Day Fleet Review, the country's largest annual display of naval power, was canceled. In its place, officials staged a shipless ceremony built around a single image, a giant poster of a submarine standing in for the vessels that were not there. RETENTIONCHECKPOINT, 0 o'clock hook. No flotilla. No flyover of warships passing a reviewing stand. Just a poster and a holiday that Moscow chose to keep rather than skip entirely. Here's what we're going to walk through today. What is actually confirmed about why the parade disappeared this year, what Navy Day has meant to Russian military messaging for nearly a century, and why the Kremlin apparently decided that a scaled-down, shipless ceremony was better than no ceremony at all. We'll also be upfront about where the reporting gets thin. This is a story where it's tempting to fill in blanks with assumption, and we're not going to do that. What the sourcing actually says, according to Business Insider and the Maritime Executive, Russia canceled its traditional Navy Day fleet review this year following a series of Ukrainian strikes on naval targets. The usual warship parade, the one that has anchored the holiday for decades, did not happen. In its place, the reported ceremony was built around a large poster depicting a submarine, a symbolic stand-in for the fleet that normally would have been on the water. That's the confirmed core of the story. The fleet review was called off, replaced with a scaled-back, ship-free event centered on that submarine poster. The broader context cited alongside it, a pattern of Ukrainian strikes on Russian naval assets, is reported as the backdrop to the decision, not as a fully itemized, independently verified list of what was hit, when, or how badly. That distinction matters. One is a documented event, a canceled parade, a substitute ceremony. The other is a general trend that multiple outlets have described over the past several years, and we'll treat it exactly that way, as reported context, not as settled, block-by-block fact for this specific year's event. I spent some time going through how outlets have covered Navy Day cancellations and scalebacks before, and one detail kept nagging me. This isn't the first time the holiday itself has survived while the parade around it shrank. RETENTIONCHECKPOINT. Personal research phrase. Understanding why means understanding what Navy Day actually is and why Russian leadership treats it as something close to untouchable. Navy Day, Den Wojenno-Morskiego Flota, was formally established as a Soviet holiday in 1939, part of a wave of service-specific military holidays created under Stalin to build institutional pride and public visibility for each branch. It faded after the collapse of the Soviet Union, then was revived and re-elevated in the mid-1990s under Boris Yeltsin, and has stayed a major set piece of Russian military messaging ever since, particularly under the current government. The centerpiece, in its standard form, is a fleet review. Warships arranged in formation on the water, most famously on the Neva River running through St. Petersburg, with the head of state reviewing them from a vessel moving along the line, flanked by flyovers and smaller reviews staged simultaneously in other fleet home ports, including Kronstadt, Sevastopol, Vladivostok, and Baltiysk. The point of that format isn't subtle. A fleet review is a demonstration. It tells a domestic audience that the Navy is intact, present, and worth being proud of. It tells any foreign audience watching the footage the same thing, whether they intended to watch or not. Ships in formation are, among other things, propaganda in the literal, historical sense of that word, a coordinated visual statement built to convey strength. Think about what actually goes into staging one of these reviews when it happens the normal way. Vessels have to be pulled from patrol rotations and maintenance schedules and repositioned on a fixed date into a tight formation in a body of water that is, by definition, predictable and exposed. Air defense has to cover the review area. Every ship on the water becomes part of a single, choreographed image built for cameras as much as for the sailors themselves. That's a lot of coordination for a ceremonial event, and from a purely operational standpoint, it's also a lot of exposure concentrated in one place, on one day, announced well in advance, which is exactly why a canceled fleet review isn't a small, technical scheduling matter. What's most surprising about this story isn't that a war has disrupted a peacetime tradition. Wars disrupt traditions constantly. What's surprising is the specific choice Russian officials reportedly made: not to quietly skip the holiday, not to hold a normal review anyway and accept the optics. Instead, they built a third option: a ceremony with no ships, anchored around a poster of one. That choice tells you something about how much the fleet review's absence weighed against the risk of no observance at all. Now for the backdrop, the reporting places this decision against, because understanding it as general, well-documented context helps explain why a shipless ceremony was even on the table as an option. Since 2022, Ukraine has waged a sustained and unconventional campaign against Russian naval assets in the Black Sea, relying heavily on uncrewed surface vessels and long-range missiles rather than a conventional navy of its own. Ukraine doesn't field a blue water fleet capable of challenging Russia's Black Sea fleet ship for ship. That asymmetry is itself part of the story analysts have written about extensively. A country with essentially no navy pushing a larger conventional fleet out of large parts of its own home waters. The most widely reported single incident in that campaign remains the sinking of the Russian Black Sea Fleet flagship Moskva in April 2022. Ukrainian officials attributed the sinking to a strike from domestically produced Neptune anti-ship missiles. Russian officials, for their part, attributed the loss to an onboard fire and munitions explosion and did not acknowledge a missile strike. Both are attributable claims from named sides, not an independently adjudicated finding, and outlets covering it at the time were careful to frame it that way, which is exactly how we're framing it here. That single loss reshaped how the Black Sea Fleet operated for years afterward. But the Moskva was one data point in a longer campaign, and the more recent chapter of that campaign is the one that matters for understanding this year's Navy Day. Over 2023 and into 2024, multiple defense outlets, including USNI News and Naval News, documented a series of Ukrainian strikes using naval drones and missiles against Russian vessels and facilities in occupied Crimea and around Novorossiysk. Russia was reported to have relocated a significant portion of its Black Sea Fleet away from Sevastopol, its historic main base, toward ports considered further from the range of Ukrainian strike capability. You'd think a navy pulling its own flagship base back from the front line would get loudly announced. It wasn't. RETENTION CHECKPOINT. Myth-busting. Most people assume a military response like that would be publicized as a strategic choice. Instead, it got pieced together gradually by open-source analysts and defense reporters tracking satellite imagery and shipping movements. Worth remembering any time a single dramatic headline claims to explain, in full, why something like a canceled parade happened. The real picture, in naval reporting especially, is almost always assembled slowly, from many partial sources, not delivered all at once in a single confirmed statement. That's the general environment this year's Navy Day decision sits inside. It isn't, on its own, proof of exactly which ships were unavailable, exactly how many vessels were damaged in the lead-up to this specific holiday, or what internal reasoning Russian Naval Command gave for replacing the review with a poster. The named sources here, Business Insider and the Maritime Executive, reported the cancellation and the substitute ceremony as the concrete, sourced facts. The strikes on naval targets are cited as the reported reason behind that decision, and we're presenting it exactly at that level of certainty, as the stated context for the cancellation, not as a fully itemized casualty report. Here's what this tells us about the state of Russian naval messaging right now, and it's worth sitting with for a second. RETENTION CHECKPOINT. Authorial opinion. For most of the post-Soviet era, Navy Day functioned as a low-risk, high-reward set piece, a guaranteed win, visually, for the state. A shipless version of that same holiday isn't neutral. It quietly concedes that the guaranteed win is no longer guaranteed, even while officials clearly judge that saying nothing at all was worse. That's a fairly narrow needle to thread for an event built entirely around visible strength. So where does that leave the actual open question here, the one this video set out to answer? It isn't really, did Ukraine damage the Russian Navy? That much, in general terms, has been documented across multiple outlets for going on 3 years now. The narrower and harder question is this: was this year's decision driven mainly by operational realities, ships that were genuinely unavailable in the wrong place, or judged too risky to sail into a symbolic, predictable, stationary formation? Or was it, at least in part, a deliberate messaging choice to avoid a visual that officials worried would underline recent losses rather than project strength? Both explanations are plausible. Neither is confirmed by what's publicly available. Here's the take that'll probably get us some pushback. Replacing the review with a poster was, if anything, a more revealing choice than either alternative. RETENTIONCHECKPOINT. Controversial take. Skipping the holiday outright would have been a quiet, forgettable non-event. Holding a normal review despite the risk would have read as confidence, however forced. Building an entire ceremony around a picture of a submarine invites exactly the kind of scrutiny and commentary this story is now getting, ours included. If the goal was to minimize attention on the state of the fleet, this may not have been the way to do it. We're curious where you land on that. RETENTIONCHECKPOINT. Viewer question. Do you read a shipless Navy Day as a forced admission that the fleet review genuinely couldn't happen the normal way, or as a calculated bit of stagecraft that Russian officials thought would land better than it has? Tell us which one you buy, and why. This is one of those stories where reasonable people are going to disagree. There's a detail about this story we want to flag honestly rather than pretend we've nailed down. Neither Business Insider nor the Maritime Executive, in the reporting available to us, published a full, itemized account of which specific vessels were originally slated to take part in this year's review, or a confirmed, official Russian explanation directly tying the cancellation to particular strikes. RETENTIONCHECKPOINT. Engagement hook curiosity gap. If you've come across a primary Russian government statement that addresses the cancellation directly, we'd genuinely like to see it. Drop it in the comments, because it isn't something we could independently verify going into this video. So let's be precise about where this stands right now. Confirmed, per Business Insider and the Maritime Executive, Russia's traditional Navy Day fleet review was canceled this year, replaced by a shipless ceremony centered on a large poster of a submarine. Confirmed, from years of separate reporting by outlets including USNI News and Naval News, Ukraine has conducted a sustained campaign of strikes against Russian naval assets and facilities in the Black Sea since 2022, using naval drones and missiles, and Russia has previously relocated Black Sea Fleet assets away from Sevastopol as a result. Not confirmed, at least not in the sourcing reviewed for this video. An official, on-the-record Russian government statement explaining the cancellation in its own words, and a specific, itemized account of which naval losses or unavailable ships this year's decision was directly responding to. That gap is worth sitting with rather than filling in with guesswork. It would be easy to round this story up into something more dramatic than what's actually been reported, to state as fact that a specific number of ships were destroyed, or that a named commander made a named decision for a named reason. None of that is in the public record for this specific event, so none of it belongs in this video, however much it might make for a tighter narrative. What we can say is that the symbolism did not go unnoticed. A poster standing in for a fleet is the kind of image that invites exactly the comparison it seems designed to avoid. What the holiday used to look like versus what it looked like this year. Whether that comparison was worth making, from the Kremlin's perspective, against the alternative of simply not marking the day at all, is the actual strategic calculation buried inside this story. It's one we may not get a fully confirmed answer to for some time. If you want to check any of this yourself rather than take our word for it, that's exactly the right instinct, and it's an easy story to trace. RETENTIONCHECKPOINT. Last 60s payoff and open loop. Start with the original Business Insider and Maritime Executive coverage of this year's Navy Day, then look at how USNI News and Naval News have tracked Black Sea Fleet movements and losses since 2022 for the longer-running context behind it. Search Russian Navy Day Fleet Review canceled, Russia submarine poster Navy Day, and Black Sea Fleet Sevastopol relocation, and you'll be able to follow the sourcing chain yourself, story by story, rather than relying on any single video, including this one, to hand you the full picture. Because that's really the honest ending here. This is a story still being written in real time, filled in gradually by open source reporters piecing together satellite images, shipping movements, and official statements long after the headlines fade. What we know for certain today is narrower than the dramatic version of this story that's easy to imagine. What we don't yet know, the specifics behind this particular decision, is exactly what's worth watching for next, whenever more of it becomes public.